The scream didn't come from the house. It came from under the ground. Keisha froze in the middle of the Caldwell Rose garden, her hand still wrapped around a watering can, when a tiny, muffled cry rose from the soil at her feet. "Help, it hurts!" For a split second, her heart stopped. Then she dropped to her knees and began clawing through the soft dirt with her bare hands. "Baby? Baby, where are you?" Her fingers hit fabric. Blue pajamas. Then warm skin. A boy's small hand. Keisha dug faster, ripping through the soil like a woman possessed. Suddenly the earth collapsed, and little Ethan Caldwell burst upward, coughing, screaming, his chest heaving like he'd been fighting for his life underground. "Oh, Lord! Come here, baby. I got you." She pulled him into her arms, dirt flying everywhere as he clutched her uniform and cried into her neck. And that's when a door slammed. Richard Caldwell, billionaire, powerful, respected, stormed across the patio with a face twisted in horror. Behind him, his fiancée, Brooke, glided out like a perfectly dressed shadow. Richard tore Ethan out of Keisha's arms, so fast the boy wailed again. "What did you do to my son?" he roared. "What did you do?" Keisha staggered back. "Sir, no. I found him buried. I heard him calling. I pulled him out. Please." Brooke gasped dramatically, hand flying to her mouth like she was performing for a camera. "Oh my God! Richard, look at her. Dirt all over her hands. She was out here alone. You don't think she—" "I didn't touch him!" Keisha cried, shaking. But Richard's eyes were already filling with rage the world had never allowed him to show. Rage that needed a target. Rage that found the black woman kneeling in the dirt. "You buried my son alive," he whispered, trembling with fury. "You tried to kill him." Keisha's throat closed. No, sir. I would never." Brooke stepped forward, expression soft and poisonous. "She's been acting strange for weeks. Richard. Always near the kids. Always watching." "That's a lie," Keisha whispered. "I saved him." Ethan reached out weakly toward her, but Brooke pulled his hand down fast before Richard could notice. Then Brooke leaned closer to Keisha, smiling with her eyes cold. Wrong families don't get second chances in houses like this. Keisha felt her world tilt, like the earth had shifted under her knees the same way she dug through it moments ago. Because she realized something. Someone buried this child alive, and someone wanted her blamed for it. If this already made your blood boil, tap like, and subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins. The mansion felt different after that morning. Not quieter, just colder, like the walls themselves had heard Richard's accusation and decided to believe it. Keisha walked through the hallway with her head slightly bowed, the way black women learn to move when the air in a room has turned dangerous. Every staff member avoided her eyes. Some whispered behind hands. Some simply stepped aside like she carried something contagious. And in the middle of that silence, Brooke glided effortlessly. Perfect silk robe, perfect blonde curls, perfect fake grief shimmering in her voice every time she spoke loud enough for someone to overhear. "I just can't believe she was capable of this," Brooke whispered to a maid as Keisha passed. "I trusted her with our children." Keisha kept her eyes forward. "Keep walking. Don't give them the satisfaction." But the words stung. They always stung. When she reached the foyer, she found Richard standing there, phone pressed to his ear, tension in every line of his body. "I don't care. Find out who leaked that story," he snapped. No reporter uses a phrase, "buried alive," unless someone fed it to them. Keisha paused. Brooke stood behind him, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised in silent irritation. She hadn't expected the media to move this fast. Richard turned and stopped when he saw Keisha. Those eyes, cold, suspicious, like he was looking at a stranger he wished never existed. "Sir," Keisha said softly. "Is Ethan? Don't speak to me," he said sharply. Brooke stepped between them, voice honey sweet. "Keisha, you should go rest. Trauma affects people like you deeply. People like you." The phrase slid under Keisha's skin like a needle dipped in ice. But before she could respond, footsteps pattered from the top of the stairs. Little Sophie, Ethan's sister, clutched her stuffed bear, eyes wide and scared. "Miss Keisha," she whispered. Brooke's head snapped upward. "Sophie, sweetheart, come here." But the child didn't move. She looked only at Keisha. "Are you leaving?" Sophie asked. Her voice was soft, but the fear in it was sharp as glass. Keisha knelt. "No, baby, I'm right here." Brooke descended the stairs quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sophie, darling, come to mommy. I'm not your mommy," Sophie said quietly. Brooke froze. Keisha blinked. That wasn't normal boldness. That was fear talking. Sophie stepped closer, whispering so low only Keisha could hear. "She told me not to talk to you. She said you were bad luck." Keisha's stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" But Sophie looked past her, toward Brooke, and backed away, lips trembling. Keisha touched the girl's shoulder gently. "It's okay, sweet pea." But it wasn't, because Sophie wasn't afraid of Keisha. She was afraid of someone else in this house. Someone who smiled sweetly. Someone who lied easily. Someone who had buried her brother alive and nearly gotten away with it. And Keisha knew one thing with absolute certainty. The danger wasn't over. It was just getting started. The hallway outside the children's rooms always felt quiet, but tonight it felt wrong. Still, heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Keisha pushed the door open slowly. Little Ethan lay curled on his bed, his tiny fingers gripping the dinosaur plush she'd washed by hand. His breaths were shallow, uneven. Trauma did that to children, pulled them into a place too dark for their age. She sat beside him and whispered, "Baby, you want some water?" His eyelids fluttered. Then he slowly turned his face toward her. "She said I had to be quiet," he whispered. Keisha's blood turned cold. "Who, baby?" Ethan swallowed hard, voice cracking. "She said if I scream again, she'll put me back." The words didn't just chill her. They carved through her like ice. Ethan didn't have the imagination to invent a nightmare like that. No 6-year-old did. "Who said that, sweetheart?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He only glanced toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the place where Brooke always appeared without warning. Silent shoes, quiet steps, smile like a polished blade. Keisha leaned closer. "It's okay. You can tell me." Ethan's lips trembled. The lady in the white dress. Keisha's breath froze in her chest. Brooke always wore white. A soft creak split the silence. Keisha turned slowly. Brooke stood in the doorway, her smile stretched too wide, her eyes too calm, her presence too sudden. "Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said lightly. "I just heard voices." She stepped into the room, her perfume sweet and sickening. Ethan stiffened instantly, shrinking into Keisha's side. Brooke noticed, and her smile faltered for half a second. "I think it's time for his rest," she said, voice tightening. "He needs a stable environment, not emotional confusion." Keisha rose to her feet. "He's scared. He needs comfort. He needs order," Brooke snapped. Something inside Keisha sharpened. "Then why is he terrified of you?" Brooke blinked, the mask slipping, then snapping back into place. Children are emotional. They misinterpret things. Keisha stepped between Brooke and the boy. "Not this." For the first time, Brooke's eyes hardened into something real, something dangerous. "Careful," she whispered. "People already think you're unstable." Ethan let out a small, broken whimper, and Brooke's expression flickered with irritation, the kind she couldn't hide fast enough. Keisha knelt, cupped Ethan's face gently, and whispered, "I'm here. I'm not letting anything happen to you." Brooke's jaw tightened. The air in the room felt electric, the kind that comes before a storm, because now Keisha knew the truth. Ethan wasn't lying. He wasn't confused. He wasn't imagining things. Someone really had threatened to bury him again, and that someone was standing right in front of her. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe. Keisha waited until the hallway was empty before slipping into the West Wing, the part of the mansion where staff files, old storage crates, and things a family didn't want to think about were kept. She moved quietly, every footstep measured. If Brooke caught her here, the lie would become permanent truth. Inside the staff archive room, Dust floated like gray snow. Metal shelves leaned under the weight of years of forgotten paperwork. Keisha pulled open a drawer labeled residency/background, last 5 years. Brooke's file should have been on top. It wasn't. That was the first red flag. She dug deeper. Payroll logs, contract renewals, ID copies. But the section for Brooke was almost empty, just a single employment form with half the fields left blank. No social security number. No previous address. And the name wasn't even Brooke. It read Brooke Winters, but the signature below said B. Cortez. Keisha's heart thudded. Cortez. That name wasn't random. She'd seen something like it before, on a torn envelope in Brooke's dressing room 2 weeks ago. She pulled the folder closer. Inside was a photocopy of a passport. Same face. Different name. Elena Cortez Buenos Aires. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just a woman hiding a last name. This was someone who had been several people before she became Brooke. She grabbed everything she could fit under her apron and slipped out of the room. As she turned down the hallway, a sudden movement made her stop. Little Sophie stood at the end of the corridor, clutching a crumpled photograph. "Miss Keisha," she whispered, "I found this under her shoes." Keisha knelt and opened the photo. It was Brooke, younger, darker hair, standing beside a different child. A girl, maybe 6, same age as Ethan. The little girl looked frightened, like she'd been told not to move. On the back, written in faint ink, Lily Rio. Keisha's breath shook. Sophie's voice trembled. She said the girl was me. But she's not me. Keisha squeezed the child's hand. "You did the right thing, baby." "Thank you." Sophie looked toward the stairs. "Miss Keisha, is she bad?" Keisha's heart broke a little. "She's dangerous." Suddenly footsteps echoed, soft, elegant, too familiar. Keisha slipped the photo into her pocket and straightened just as Brooke appeared. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes were knives. "What are you two doing out here?" Sophie flinched. Keisha stepped forward, blocking her. "Just checking the windows. Draft comes through this hallway." Brooke tilted her head. "Careful where you wander, Keisha. Some places in this house, you don't belong." Keisha held her gaze. "I belong wherever those kids are." For the first time, Brooke's expression cracked, a flash of something cold, furious, unfiltered. Then she turned sharply and walked away. And in that moment, Keisha understood. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This wasn't grief. This woman had done something like this before, maybe more than once. And Keisha had just found the first real proof. The east wing of the mansion had always felt forgotten. Cold wallpaper, dim lights, doors that hadn't been opened in years. But tonight, it felt like something else. A place that remembered. Keisha walked slowly, fingers brushing the faded floral patterns on the walls. Ethan's trembling confession still echoed in her head. She said if I scream again, she'll put me back. There was no child in the world who invented fear like that. Halfway down the hallway, Keisha noticed a thin strip of light leaking from a door that should have been shut tight. An old nursery. The kind families lock after too much grief. She pushed it open. Dust covered everything. An abandoned crib, yellowing curtains, toys untouched for years. But something was off. The air felt disturbed, like someone had been here recently. Keisha crouched near the far wall and noticed a metal vent that didn't match the age of the room. New screws, new frame, too clean. She pressed her ear to it. At first, nothing. Then a faint whisper. A woman's voice. Soft, cold, rehearsed. "Don't cry. Good children stay quiet." Every muscle in Keisha's body froze. Someone had spoken those exact words to Ethan. She reached into the vent. Her fingers brushed paper. She pulled it out, a crumpled photograph. A little girl, maybe 6, eyes frightened, standing beside Brooke, younger, different hair, same smile. On the back, a faint note, "Lily, Rio de Janeiro." Keisha's breath shook. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. "And Miss Keisha," she turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, barefoot, clutching the frame. His voice trembled. "That's where she put Lily." Keisha knelt fast. "You saw her?" Ethan nodded. She cried a lot. Brooke said if I tell, she'll make me go in the wall. Keisha pulled him close, heart pounding. You're safe. I promise. Footsteps approached in the hall. Steady, deliberate. Keisha stepped into the hallway, just as Richard appeared. His eyes were red, exhausted but sharper than before. What are you doing in this wing? He asked. Keisha handed him the photo. This was in the vent, and Ethan remembers her. Richard stared at the picture too long. His jaw tightened. His breath caught. I've seen that face, he whispered. Brooke told me it was her sister. She said she died in a fire. Keisha shook her head. She lied. To you. To everyone. Richard backed away slowly, shock draining the color from his face. My God, sir, Keisha said softly. Your children aren't safe with her. Before he could answer, a soft voice floated around the corner. Richard, what are you all doing here? Brooke, perfect, polished, smiling. But this time, her eyes flickered with panic the moment she saw the photo in his hand. Keisha watched it happen. For the first time, Brooke's mask slipped, and the truth, the real truth, finally peeked through. Dinner on the terrace was supposed to look elegant. Soft lights, wine glasses shining like crystal, a quiet breeze moving through the hedges. But even from inside the house, Keisha could feel the tension vibrating through the air. Richard sat at the table stiffly, jaw tight. Brooke sat across from him in a white dress that glowed under the lanterns, the same dress Ethan described in a trembling whisper. Keisha stood inside the glass door, eyes locked on the scene. Richard lifted the photo of little Lily and placed it on the table. Her smile faltered instantly. Who is she? He asked quietly. Brooke blinked, then forced a small laugh. Richard, what is this? Don't play with me, he said, voice shaking. You told me she was your sister. You said she died in a fire. Brooke's eyes flickered, panic in a single flash. Then she leaned back in her chair, shoulders relaxing as if slipping into a role. She was like a sister, a foster child. She struggled. She ran away. I didn't want to upset you with the details. Richard tossed the other photo, the one from the vent, onto the table. This was in the wall. Brooke's hands froze. He leaned forward. Why was my son buried alive? Why did he say you put him back? The lantern light caught the corner of Brooke's eye. Something inside her shifted. I don't like what you're insinuating, she whispered. Keisha stepped out onto the terrace. Then answer him. Brooke turned sharply. You don't belong here. Keisha didn't move. Neither did Lily. The name hit Brooke like a slap. Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled into the tablecloth. Her eyes darkened, the real her rising from underneath all the pretending. Richard, she said slowly, voice trembling, you know how emotional workers like her can get? They invent things. They manipulate. She wants attention. Richard stood. No, he said. She wants the truth. Brooke stood too, smile twisting into something sharp enough to cut. You think your precious Maid can protect you from your own guilt? You weren't even there when Ethan disappeared. You let this house fall apart. And now you're looking for someone to blame. Keisha stepped closer. He cried for help. I heard him. Brooke's eyes snapped toward her, furious, unmasked. You should have kept walking. Richard stared at her, really stared, and something inside him broke. You hurt my son, he whispered. Brooke laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, Richard. You don't have the spine to believe that. That's when a voice came from behind them. I do. Detective Ramirez stepped into the lantern light, badge glinting, expression grim. We've got enough to talk, Ms. Cortez. Or should I say, Winters? Or Monroe? Or Chase? Brooke froze. Her mask, the last piece of it, shattered. Ramirez stepped forward. You're coming with me. Brooke's voice trembled. You have no proof. Keisha stepped beside him, placing the photo on the table. We do now. Brooke's face twisted into something feral, desperate. Then she ran, straight into the arms of two officers waiting at the stairs. Her scream echoed across the terrace, sharp, furious, defeated. Richard sank into his chair, hands shaking. Keisha exhaled for the first time in hours. The collapse had begun. The house felt different once Brooke was gone. Not quieter, lighter, as if the walls that once had secrets were finally allowed to breathe again. Detective Ramirez escorted the officers out while Richard stood frozen on the terrace, the weight of everything settling over him like dust after a collapse. Inside, Keisha made her way slowly toward the staircase, toward the two children whose lives had been dangling over the edge of something much darker than anyone had realized. Sophie sat on the top step, clutching her teddy bear, eyes red from crying. When she saw Keisha, she ran into her arms without hesitation. "Is she gone?" Sophie whispered. "Yes, baby," Keisha said gently. "She's gone." Ethan peeked from behind the railing, his face pale, his little fingers gripping the wood tight. The moment he saw Keisha, he stepped forward carefully, like a child afraid the ground might open again beneath him. She knelt, opening her arms. He collapsed into her chest. No words, just a small, broken sob, the kind only a child who survived something unthinkable can make. Richard appeared at the bottom of the stairs, but this time his voice wasn't angry. "Keisha, I'm so sorry." She stood slowly, still holding Ethan, still supporting Sophie. "You believe what she wanted you to believe," Keisha said softly, "but your children told the truth without speaking." Richard's voice cracked. "I failed all of you." Keisha shook her head. "You can fix it by protecting them now." He nodded, slipping a trembling hand over his face. "I didn't see who she was," he whispered. Keisha looked toward the photo Detective Ramirez had taken. The picture of Lily, the girl whose story never got told. "People like her don't want you to see," Keisha replied. "They hide behind money, looks, confidence. But children feel the truth even when adults ignore it." Ramirez approached with a folder. "It's confirmed," he said. "Multiple identities. Ties to missing children cases overseas. She's going away for a long time." Richard sat heavily on the bottom step, eyes glistening, watching Sophie cling to Keisha's dress like she was the only safe place left in the world. "She saved them," he whispered. "She saved both my kids." Keisha touched Ethan's back, steady and protective. "No," she said softly. "They saved me too." A long silence settled, warm, not heavy, the kind that comes when truth finally wins. Later that night, Keisha tucked Ethan and Sophie into bed. The door cracked just enough for the hallway light to spill in. No shadows, no cold whispers, no danger hiding behind a silk smile, just peace. She turned off the lamp and whispered to herself, "No child in this house is ever going to be afraid again, not while I'm breathing." If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters.